The steel doors slam shut, not as an end, but sometimes merely a pause. We think of prisons as society's final judgment, a place where the wicked are contained, their capacity for harm supposedly neutralized. But what happens when the cell block itself, a world within a world, becomes a new crime scene? Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber and perpetrator of other deadly anti-abortion and anti-gay attacks, eluded authorities for 5 years, a testament to his survivalist skills and determination. Captured and sentenced in 2005 to multiple life terms, his defiant spirit was far from broken. In 2006, while housed in the ADX Florence Supermax prison, Rudolph was caught attempting to smuggle forbidden items, including materials that could potentially be used in an escape attempt. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported on this audacious effort, a stark indication that Rudolph had not accepted his fate. This act speaks volumes about his psychological makeup. Resourceful, fiercely independent, and utterly unwilling to submit to the system he so vehemently opposed through his bombings. He was a man who had lived on his own terms in the wilderness, and the thought of decades in a concrete cell was likely anathema to him. His attempt to gather escape materials wasn't just a breach of rules, it was a declaration of his continued rebellion. The motive appears clear, a desperate, calculated bid for freedom, however slim the chances. The social impact of such an attempt, especially from a high-profile domestic terrorist, would send shockwaves through the prison system, forcing reviews of security protocols. Rudolph's actions reinforced the image of a cunning and relentless adversary, one who viewed his imprisonment as merely another obstacle to overcome. It begs the question, when a man has dedicated his life to fighting a system, even through horrific violence, does the fight ever truly end, even within the most secure confines imaginable? Omar Abdel Rahman, known as the Blind Sheikh, was the spiritual leader whose fiery rhetoric and fatwas were linked to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and a wider conspiracy to wage a war of urban terrorism against the United States. Sentenced in 1995 to life in prison, his physical confinement did not equate to ideological silence. In the year 2000, while imprisoned, Reuters reported that Abdel Rahman was caught attempting to pass messages to terror groups on the outside, using his privileged communications as an avenue to potentially direct or inspire further acts of violence. This was a man whose power lay in his words and his religious influence, and he sought to wield that power even from the depths of the American justice system. Psychologically, the Sheikh was an unyielding figure, completely devoted to his extremist interpretation of Islam and his call for jihad against the West. His attempts to communicate with terror networks from prison were not surprising. They were a continuation of his life's work. The context of his imprisonment was already highly sensitive, given his status and the global reach of his followers. The motive was clear: to maintain his leadership role, to circumvent the restrictions of his sentence, and to continue to play a part in the global jihadist movement. The consequences of a figure like Abdul Rahman managing to send messages to active terrorist organizations are grave, posing a significant national security threat. It underscores the immense difficulty in isolating influential leaders whose followers may still look to them for guidance, regardless of prison walls. Can true ideological leadership ever be fully contained when its essence is not physical but communicable? Ramzi Youssef, the architect of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, a man of chilling intellect and sophisticated planning, was sentenced in 1997 to life imprisonment plus 240 years. He was deemed so dangerous that he was placed in the ADX Florence Supermax prison under the tightest security. Yet, even from within this fortress, Youssef's influence sought to penetrate the outside world. In 1997, the same year as his most significant sentencing, the New York Times reported that he was involved in coordinating prohibited actions from his cell, attempting to pass messages and maintain illicit connections. This wasn't mere rule-breaking, it was the action of a strategic mind still trying to operate, to exert influence despite near-total isolation. Psychologically, Youssef embodies the dedicated, intelligent, and remorseless terrorist operative. His in-prison activities demonstrated a refusal to be neutralized, a persistent drive to continue his agenda, or at least maintain contact with like-minded individuals. The context of Supermax confinement is designed to prevent exactly this kind of communication, making his attempts all the more audacious. The motive was likely a combination of maintaining his status, continuing his ideological struggle, and simply defying the authorities who held him captive. The consequences of such actions from one of the world's most notorious terrorists are immense, highlighting the perpetual challenge of ensuring that incarceration truly severs all operational ties. It makes one shudder to think, how do you truly silence a mind so adept at manipulation and planning, even when its body is caged? Terry Nichols, convicted for his role in the 2000 Oklahoma City bombing, one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism on U.S. soil, was a man who had already demonstrated a capacity for intricate, devastating plotting. Serving multiple life sentences following his 1997 conviction, Nichols did not simply resign himself to a life behind bars. In the year 2000, judicial records revealed that this quiet, seemingly unassuming accomplice to mass murder was found to be organizing conspiracies with other inmates, actively engaging in activities that violated prison regulations and hinted at a mind still capable of and inclined towards illicit plotting. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of violence, but a more calculated form of defiance, a whisper of his former self. The psychological profile of Nichols has always been somewhat enigmatic, overshadowed by the more bombastic Timothy McVeigh. Yet, his involvement in the intricate planning of the bombing showed a meticulous, if warped, mind. His in-prison activities suggest that this methodical approach, this tendency towards conspiratorial thinking and action, was not extinguished by his incarceration. Was he seeking to regain a sense of control, to build a new network of influence within the prison walls? Or was it simply the nature of a mind accustomed to operating in the shadows, unable to cease its machinations? The social environment of a federal penitentiary can be a fertile ground for such activities, where information and alliances can become forms of currency and power. The consequences of his plotting, even if not leading to external violence, would have been taken extremely seriously by authorities, ever vigilant against a man with his history. It prompts a chilling thought. Can the impulse to conspire, to undermine, truly be imprisoned when it resides so deeply within an individual's character? David Pissarro, a former CIA contractor, carried the weight of a violent past into his prison sentence. Convicted in 2007 for the brutal beating of an Afghan detainee, which led to the man's death, Pissarro was serving an 8-year and 4-month sentence when the shadows of his aggression resurfaced. In 2008, inside a United States penitentiary, this man, trained in methods of interrogation and coercion, turned his violent tendencies on a fellow inmate, attacking him with a makeshift weapon. This wasn't a crime of opportunity born of prison desperation alone. It was a chilling echo of the brutality for which he was already condemned. CNN reported on this attack, highlighting a disturbing continuum of violence. The psychological portrait of Pissarro is one of a man seemingly incapable of resolving conflict or asserting himself without resorting to physical force. His prior actions in Afghanistan demonstrated a profound disregard for human life and the rules of engagement. Inside prison, stripped of his authority and tools of the trade, did he revert to the most primal form of dominance he knew? The social environment of a maximum security prison is inherently tense, a place where perceived weakness can be a death sentence. Did Pissarro feel compelled to establish a fearsome reputation? Or was this simply an uncontrollable eruption of his violent nature? The motive seems deeply rooted in a personality that equates power with physical aggression. The consequences of this in-prison assault would have been severe, not just for the victim, but for the prison's climate of fear and the ongoing challenge of managing violent offenders. It makes one wonder, if the very core of a man's identity is intertwined with violence, can any prison truly break the cycle, or does it merely offer new victims? Staff Sergeant Robert Bales, the U.S. soldier who committed one of the most horrific atrocities of the Afghanistan war by murdering 16 Afghan civilians, mostly women and children, in cold blood, was a man whose psyche had clearly fractured. Sentenced in 2013 to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his descent did not end at the prison gates. In 2014, while incarcerated at the high-security disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Bales was involved in a violent altercation, a physical fight with other inmates, a clear breach of the prison's strict disciplinary code. Reuters noted this incident, a small but telling footnote to a much larger, more tragic story. What does such an act signify for a man already condemned for unimaginable violence? Was it a sign of ongoing psychological turmoil? Perhaps the lingering effects of PTSD or other combat-related stress disorders that he claimed contributed to his original rampage? Or did it point to a more fundamental issue of aggression and an inability to cope with confinement and authority? The prison environment, particularly one housing military offenders, has its own rigid hierarchy and codes of conduct. For Bales, a man who had executed a meticulously planned massacre, a simple prison fight might seem minor. Yet, it speaks to a continued inability to control violent impulses, even when facing the starkest consequences. The social impact within the prison could be significant, reinforcing his image as a dangerous and unpredictable individual. The motive could be complex, a flash of anger, a response to provocation, or simply the manifestation of a perpetually simmering rage. This incident, though not adding to his life sentence, serves as a grim reminder of the deep scars war can leave on a soldier's soul, and the challenges the system faces in managing individuals whose capacity for extreme violence has been so devastatingly proven. Does a life sentence truly quell the storm within, or merely contain its destructive path? Lindy England, another figure whose image became synonymous with the Abu Ghraib scandal, a young woman whose photographs with Iraqi detainees shocked the world, found her infamy following her into the federal prison system. Sentenced in 2005 to 3 years for her role in the abuse, one might have hoped for a period of quiet reflection. However, in 2006, within the confines of her correctional facility, England became embroiled in conflicts with fellow inmates, her actions escalating to the point of creating a tangible threat to the safety and security of the institution. Judicial records from the time paint a picture of continued volatility. This wasn't a mastermind criminal, perhaps, but someone whose judgment and impulse control were severely compromised, leading to confrontational behavior even in a setting demanding compliance. Was this a manifestation of trauma, a misplaced aggression born from her own notorious past and the pressures of incarceration? Or did it reveal a more consistent inability to navigate social structures without resorting to antagonism? Her psychological profile, as gleaned from her initial crimes, already suggested a susceptibility to influence and a disturbing lack of empathy. Within the charged atmosphere of a prison, these traits could easily translate into friction and hostility. The social dynamics for a prisoner as notorious as England would have been incredibly complex. She would have been a target for some, an object of curiosity for others, making assimilation and peaceful coexistence fraught with challenges. The consequences of her in-prison actions, while not resulting in a lengthy new sentence, underscored the difficulty of managing inmates whose public notoriety precedes them, creating ripples of instability. It forces us to consider, can the patterns of behavior that lead to international condemnation truly be contained by prison walls, or do they merely find new, more confined arenas for expression? Charles Graner, a name already seared into public consciousness for his role in the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal, was a man whose public persona suggested a strict, if brutal, adherence to a certain kind of order. Yet, behind the prison walls, where he was sent to pay for those shocking abuses, a different kind of defiance festered. In the year 2006, while incarcerated for his crimes that earned him a 10-year sentence in 2005, Graner, the former prison guard who became a prisoner, attempted to corrupt the system from within. He was caught trying to smuggle contraband, a blatant violation of the very rules he once enforced, albeit in a different military context. This act, though not earning him a new sentence, led to significant restrictions, painting a portrait of a man fundamentally at odds with authority, unless he was the authority. What drove him? Was it a desperate grasp for some semblance of control in an environment where he had none? Or perhaps a deeper, more ingrained contempt for regulations, a continuation of the mindset that led to his initial conviction? The New York Times documented this further fall, a stark reminder that a sentence doesn't always equate to submission. The psychological makeup of Graner suggests a potential narcissistic trait, an inability to see his own actions as wrong, and a persistent urge to subvert systems. His time in Abu Ghraib was characterized by a horrific abuse of power, and this in-prison offense, while less globally shocking, echoes that same disdain for established boundaries. The social environment of a prison is a complex ecosystem. For someone like Grainer, already infamous, it could have been a breeding ground for further resentment or an opportunity to assert a twisted form of dominance. The consequences of such actions ripple through the prison system, eroding trust and reinforcing the perception of incorrigibility. It begs the question, when a man who once enforced rules with brutal zeal so readily breaks them as a prisoner, what does it reveal about the nature of his character? A character seemingly forged in defiance rather than discipline. John Walker Lind, dubbed the American Taliban, captured in Afghanistan in 2001, fighting alongside Taliban forces, became a symbol of a nation's confusion and anger. Sentenced in 2002 to 20 years in prison for his service to the Taliban and carrying explosives, his time in federal custody was not without further incident. In 2003, Lind was involved in conflicts with other inmates, altercations reportedly linked to his continued adherence to and promotion of radical Islamic beliefs. The BBC touched upon these prison-based issues, which added another layer to his already complex and controversial story. This behavior, occurring relatively early in his sentence, suggested that his ideological convictions remained strong and potentially a source of friction within the general prison population, or even with other extremist inmates of the differing factions. Psychologically, Lind presented as someone who had undergone a profound ideological transformation, one that he was seemingly unwilling to renounce, even in the face of a long prison sentence. The context of a federal prison, housing a diverse population with varying beliefs and affiliations, could easily become a powder keg when strong, polarizing ideologies like Lindy's were asserted. Was his involvement in conflicts a deliberate attempt to assert dominance, a defensive reaction to perceived threats, or an inevitable byproduct of his unwavering commitment to a path that had already cost him his freedom? The consequences of such internal disruptions go beyond mere disciplinary infractions. They speak to the challenge of de-radicalization and the potential for prisons to become, paradoxically, grounds for ideological entrenchment. It leads one to ponder, when an individual has so fully embraced an identity at odds with the society that imprisoned him, can incarceration truly lead to a change of heart? Or does it simply harden the lines already drawn? Jose Padilla, an American citizen arrested in 2002 on suspicion of plotting a dirty bomb attack, became a focal point in the post-9/11 debates on terrorism and civil liberties. Though never charged with the dirty bomb plot, he was eventually convicted in 2007 for conspiracy to murder, kidnap, and maim people overseas, receiving an initial sentence of 17 years, later increased to 21. His journey through the prison system was also marked by further transgressions. In 2008, as reported by CNN and the Christian Science Monitor, Padilla was implicated in efforts to radicalize fellow inmates and was involved in other violations of prison rules. This behavior suggests a deepening, or at least a persistent commitment to extremist ideology, even after years in custody and a high-profile trial. Psychologically, Padilla's path from street gang member to alleged al-Qaeda operative, and then to an inmate attempting to influence others towards radicalism, paints a picture of someone susceptible to extremist narratives and perhaps seeking a powerful identity. The social environment within a prison can be a crucible for radicalization, where individuals, often isolated and searching for meaning or protection, can fall prey to persuasive ideologues. Padilla's actions highlight this dangerous dynamic. Was his motive a genuine desire to spread his beliefs, an attempt to gain status within the prison hierarchy, or a manifestation of his own unresolved anger and alienation? The consequences of such in-prison radicalization are far-reaching, potentially creating new threats that emerge once inmates are released, or fostering greater instability within correctional facilities themselves. It leads to a troubling question. When the seeds of extremism are sown or nurtured within prison walls, is the system inadvertently cultivating the very dangers it seeks to contain? Richard Reed, infamously known as the Shoe Bomber, attempted a catastrophic act of terrorism aboard a transatlantic flight in 2001. His capture and subsequent life sentence in 2003 were meant to neutralize a clear and present danger. However, Reed's ideological fervor did not wane behind bars. While incarcerated in the Supermax facility, ADX Florence, a prison designed to hold the most dangerous and high-risk inmates, Reed made concerted efforts in 2003 to radicalize fellow prisoners. He was caught disseminating extremist materials, attempting to sow the seeds of his violent ideology within the prison population. The Washington Post reported on these activities, underscoring the persistent threat he posed. This was not a crime of passion or desperation for personal gain. It was a calculated continuation of his jihad. Psychologically, Reed appears as an unwavering ideologue, his entire worldview filtered through a lens of extremism. Prison, for him, was not a place of repentance, but another battlefield, another opportunity to recruit for his cause. The social context of a supermax prison is one of extreme isolation, yet Reed sought to breach these barriers to spread his beliefs. The motive was purely ideological, driven by a deep-seated conviction that his violent path was righteous. The consequences of such actions are profoundly serious, threatening to turn prisons into incubators for terrorism. The authorities' swift action to curtail his efforts highlights the ongoing challenge of managing inmates committed to extremist violence. It forces a disturbing question. How do you contain an ideology so potent that even the most secure prison walls cannot entirely silence its call to violence? If these stories have compelled you to think, to question, and to reflect on these difficult issues, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more true crime narratives that aim to challenge, inform, and foster understanding. Your engagement and your perspective are invaluable as we continue to explore the shadows of the human condition. Thank you for joining us,